My boyfriend showed me this sub a while back, and after lurking for a hot second, I realized I had my own story to tell. The summer of my junior year in high school, I'd been romantically involved with a guy. We'd gotten to the point in our relationship where he was ready for me to meet his friends. We decided it would be cool if we all went to the state fair that was in town for the next few days. With a little bit of planning and corralling, we all hopped into my boyfriend's little Taurus and headed for the city. Keep in mind, we're all a bunch of dumb, edgy teenagers, so a pre-game hotbox was a must for any event. With the exception of my boyfriend who was driving, we were all pretty damn high. At one point, one of the girls in the car suggested we pull over and get some snacks from the gas station coming up. For whatever reason, I was the one who managed to get stuck with the job of running in and grabbing what everyone wanted. I was annoyed, but pretty desperate for his friends to think I was cool. I jotted down everyone's requests on my phone and headed inside. I walked up and down a few aisles for a bit, trying to find what I could from the list. Around the end of my little shopping spree, I picked up a bag of chocolate-dipped pretzels and turned to head to checkout. That was when an older man in the row behind me called out and asked me to toss him a bag. I, of course, thought nothing of this and figured I'd save him the trip and be nice. I threw one over to him. I took my snacks to the counter, and that was when I noticed the man was now following me. He asked me a few questions, like my name and where I was headed with all that food. I don't know if it was because I was blitzed or just stupid, but I happily answered all his questions, even telling him my real name and that I was headed to the fair with some friends. He smiled and told me my name was the same as his daughter's name. He seemed polite enough, maybe a bit too chatty and bad with social cues, but otherwise harmless. It was then that he offered to pay for my things, telling me I should save my money for the fair. I shook my head and insisted it was fine, but thanked him for the offer. He slapped his hand hard on my shoulder. It lingered for a bit too long. He whispered and told me not to move, and he'd get his wallet from his truck. I started to feel a bit uneasy then. I exchanged glances with the woman at the counter, and I could tell the weird feeling was mutual. I tried to use him going to his car as a chance to fish out my money, pay for my shit, and get the fuck out of there. I grabbed my receipt and started sprinting towards the car when the man made a beeline right for me in the parking lot. He wagged his finger and scolded me for leaving without waiting. I uncomfortably laughed it off and told him I should be getting back to my friends. They'd been waiting for a long time. It was then that he steered the conversation away from the snacks and asked me if I wanted to see some pictures of his daughter. He told me he kept them in his glove box, and if I wanted to see them, it would only take a second. Finally, alarms were going off in my stupid head. I declined him and told him I really needed to go right now. He reached a hand out and grabbed me by the arm towards him, repeating over and over again that it would only be a couple of minutes. I panicked and started screaming, trying to yank my arm away. That was just enough of a reaction to start turning heads in the parking lot. The man let go of me and rushed back to his car. Hyperventilating and clutching my bag of snacks, I sprinted to the Taurus, where I was bombarded with questions from my boyfriend and his friends. Apparently, everyone had thought I knew the man up until I started screaming. They intended to come out and help once they realized what was going on, but the interaction had just ended that fast that they were unable to do anything. For a few hours, I considered reporting the incident to someone, but I figured I didn't have enough info or reasoning to justify it. I still can't help but think what would have happened in that parking lot had it been a little emptier, or if I'd come alone. This story begins about 5 years ago when I was a junior in high school. There was a boy in my grade, Jack, who didn't have a lot of friends. He's on the lower end of the autism spectrum, what used to be called Asperger's syndrome. That affected his ability to pick up on social cues in his interactions with peers. Although I always knew him to be a bit awkward, he was nice enough, and I felt badly that he spent so much time alone, eating lunch alone, sitting alone at all the school activities. When he joined theater junior year, an activity I'd been a part of since I was 6, I decided to help in bringing him into the fold. Although more creative clubs do have reputations for being more accepting, it's still a difficult thing to join halfway through when everyone is already close-knit friends with everyone else. I would make my best effort to include Jack in conversations with the groups at rehearsals, talk to him one-on-one, invite him to sit with us at lunch. I even gave him my phone number to chat about things once in a while. When he asked me to hang out with him after a month or so of friendship, I said yes. I came to his family's barn and had a very nice time visiting with all the animals and eating dinner with his family. They said a few heartbreaking things throughout the dinner, like it was so nice to see him finally having a friend. They said they liked me much better than the one other friend he had, who I knew to be a kid who also had some disabilities. Unfortunately, this is around the time when our interactions stopped being healthy. He developed a severe attachment to me. It became very clear to me that he saw me in a romantic way, which I didn't return the feelings. Now that wouldn't have been too problematic if he hadn't started to pursue me in such an obsessive manner. He began texting me every hour of the day. If I ever didn't reply, I would receive another text emphasizing his last, or he would copy and paste the same message over and over again. If it were simply him saying hello to start a conversation, he would post it again and again and again until I finally responded. This was not always me ignoring him, mind you. Sometimes I was at work and unable to respond. Then, when I would unlock my phone, I'd have 10 messages from him like this. Additionally, if I did talk to him, he began pouring out every deep thought to me about depression and even having considered suicide in the past. While I'm a compassionate person who will do anything to help others, this worried me for multiple reasons. One, I'm not a trained therapist, and while I can offer some support, I don't always know the right thing to say to help. The last thing I want to do is say the wrong thing and trigger someone into hurting themselves. Additionally, I feared that him sharing these vulnerable thoughts with me and having me comfort him would make him feel as though the bond between us was closer than it was and cause him to latch on even tighter. I tried my best and advised him to speak to our school guidance counselor, which he declined as he claimed that only I could ever understand him. Around this time, he began following me to work. I didn't have a license at the time, so I had to walk from school to my after-school shifts. The store was less than a mile away, so it didn't really bother me. Jack would find me at my locker and start talking to me on my walk to the front door of the school building. I would say, "Bye, I have to go to work," but instead of waiting for his ride, he would follow behind me through the parking lot, down the street, and the entire way to where I worked. As the store I worked at is one where the customers come up to the counter and can't come inside, he would just lurk around in the parking lot for 20 minutes to half an hour, never buying anything, before eventually turning around and walking back to the school. My manager and I were both very disturbed by this whenever it happened, and I would hide in the back or clean until he left. Then the performance of our musical came, and the creep factor amped up even more. He was still constantly texting me, of course, but at this point I was going through a lot of mental health issues of my own. I didn't really have the patience to deal with this constant bothering. I replied every few days or so, but I wouldn't engage in more than casual conversation. He began to incessantly comment on everything I posted, Instagram, Facebook, responding to every single tweet. In person, he also followed me around constantly. More than once, he'd attempted to barge into the girls' dressing room and made several comments about my body and specifically my breasts to my face during that week. He happened to leave his phone on a table by me, and when I went to return it, I saw his lock screen was a photo that said, "Boobs are like the sun. If you wear sunglasses, you can stare at them as long as you like." As soon as the musical was over, I didn't have to see him on a regular basis and decided to block him on everything. His constant replies were really starting to freak me out. I told him multiple times that I couldn't always be there to talk to him, but he never listened. I blocked his number. Summer was actually quiet. I enjoyed the fact I didn't have to see or hear from him for a long time. Unfortunately, the school year brought back some contact with him, as he was now a recurring member of theater. He tried to confront me about blocking him in front of a large group of people. I just said we could talk about it later, and he failed to bring it back up. 2 weeks later, though, I got a Twitter notification that my phone contact Jack had joined Twitter, as a user posing as the school debate team. I also had a notification saying he'd followed me. He made a fake account for a club that didn't even exist at school just in order to follow me. To my advantage, he'd used his real phone number or email when making that account. Therefore, I was able to quickly block him and told my close friends to do the same. For most part, my senior year went mostly quiet, except for an incident where he'd parked right next to me and tried to hit my car. I'm somewhat sure it was just because he's a really bad driver, but I've always had a tinge of doubt in my mind. I wish I could say the story ended there, that his crush just faded out with high school graduation, and the blocks on his account and number gave him enough closure to move on. Fast forward to fall of 2017. It's been about 2.5 years since I graduated from high school. I was going through my account on Twitter and adjusting some things, and saw I still had some people set to notifications that I didn't really talk to anymore. Some people I'd blocked from old grudges that I'd long since gotten over. I saw Jack was still blocked, and figured that everything had occurred so long ago that he must be over it by now. I decided to unblock him, assuming the chances would be rare he would comment or do anything. Likes are innocent enough. How wrong I was. In my defense, it did take him quite a while to notice. Whether I just didn't pop up on his timeline for some time, or he just didn't use those applications for a while, I didn't hear from him until spring of 2018, 3 years after we'd left high school. He commented on something I posted, trying to start an argument. When I responded, he said he could never win an argument against me. Seemed innocent enough. I liked his comment and moved on. The next day, I got a message from him. "I see you're still the same as you were in high school." I responded for a bit and then stopped replying. It was only small talk, but I didn't want to contact him any further. I had a sinking feeling he was falling back in his old pattern. The next day, I got another message. Hey, are you there? I need to tell you something really important." I was taking a nap at the time, so I couldn't respond. 10 minutes later, according to the timestamp, he DM'd me the same message on Instagram and Twitter. Another 5 minutes later, I get the same message as a text, even though I didn't have his number. At this point, all the notifications woke me up. I was annoyed and felt I knew what he was going to say. "I had a huge crush on you in high school, and I still do now." At this point, I was enraged. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, or interacted with him at all during that time. He made my favorite activity stressful and uncomfortable for me. He followed me to work several times. He knows nothing about the person I'd developed into in the years since I graduated. I decided to do what I hadn't done at that point, which was explicitly tell him about how inappropriate everything he'd done was. I knew he had a disability that made it hard for him to tell how people felt about things he said or did, and that's why I felt I needed to be brutally honest. I decided clearly he had some kind of fixation on me that seemed to transcend the boundaries of distance, time, or sight, so I blocked and deleted him on everything since. I recently received a friend request that reminded me of this story. This happened after I went to university, so I was about 18 years old at the time. I had made an effort to make friends after I moved onto campus, and ended up with a few groups to hang out with, including a new girlfriend and plenty of people from my classes that I liked well enough. There was one class before lunch where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. I wasn't very discerning about who I'd go with because I got along fine with most people from the class, and we were all sort of trying to make an effort to be social at that age. This meant that when one particular girl, Lily, asked if I wanted to go eat lunch together after that class, I didn't have any reason to refuse. We talked about school and mostly pretty casual stuff, nothing really noteworthy. She did ask me to get lunch with her again the next week though. Soon it became a pattern and there wasn't exactly a way to start saying no suddenly. It was fine with me, but it did mean I lost the chance to eat lunch with anyone else on those days, which sort of hindered my social life a little. In hindsight, I suppose that was the point though. One day in class, I asked someone if I could add them on social media, and this just happened to occur in front of Lily. Immediately, I saw her face jerk towards me from a couple seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore. I still remember it even to this day. Needless to say, by the time I had gotten home later, Lily had already sent me a friend request. We had no friends in common either. I don't even know how she knew my last name. I was a bit surprised, but I guess maybe she dug through the university's social media pages and found me through there or something. I did get a bad feeling, but surely this was fine. She ended up messaging me quite a lot and commenting on anything I posted. I told myself she was just awkward. We became friends, if not close, and I'd known worse people. She still always got me to go eat lunch with her after our shared class. Other than that, though, we very rarely had any time together in person. I would see her around sometimes, but I never went out of my way to hang out with her, you know? This meant it was mostly online messaging and seeing each other in group settings. Coincidentally, my girlfriend was also called Lily. This was something that clearly bothered the other Lily. She occasionally hinted that she wanted my girlfriend to pick a different name or joked about it not suiting her. Clearly, she did not like my girlfriend at all, and I had an idea as to why. It was getting hard to ignore by this point. Lily was starting to unsubtly hint that she had a crush on me. I tried my best not to address it. I mean, what was I gonna say? I'd never known what to do when a friend tried to make a pass at me. I was also not interested in the very least. Even ignoring some of the weird stuff she did, Lily was just not my type. She tended to act and dress in a way somewhere between a 50s housewife and all those adults still obsessed with Disney princesses, if you can picture that combination. Things took an uncomfortable turn on the day of our last shared class of the year. Instead of asking me to lunch like she usually did, she asked if I'd go out for a walk with her. Again, I didn't know how to refuse, so I said a small one would be fine. Our campus was bordered by a large patch of woodland. Lily led me out into the woods, and the sounds of our fellow students slowly faded away. She sat down on a log and I joined her. She started talking about how much she was going to miss me over the summer. I tried placating her, but I really didn't want to be there, especially because she seemed to be on the verge of tears. I tried to make an excuse about having plans with my girlfriend, but before I could say anything, Lily chose to lean in and kiss me without warning. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. I got out of there and was happy to think I would not see her for a while. I came back to university after summer, moving into a house with my friends. Without going off topic, there were some serious issues in that group. Lots of petty arguing and even worse. I broke up with my girlfriend around the start of that school year as well. Basically, the whole mess made me recontextualize things with Lily. It didn't seem quite so bad after all that drama. That said, I still didn't want to be alone with her. We mostly just talked online. She was still constantly messaging me every day after all. One upside of everything was that I started dating a boy. Lily was not pleased to hear that news. I think she hoped to kinda sneak in after I broke up with my girlfriend, but as I said before, that was never going to happen. This is where the story gets bad. At this time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. I occasionally talked about my life and mostly just reblogged photos and things I found interesting. I was on there one day when something odd happened. One of the blogs I followed had received an ask with some phrases I recognized. It took a second to register that it was taken from my About page. That made me freeze. I read the message properly. Someone was asking this completely random person to analyze a section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on the type of person who would write it. I cannot stress how messed up it was to see people talking about me like I was a character in a book or something. The important thing, though, was that the question had not been anonymous. It linked to someone's blog. Obviously, I wanted to know who had taken such a bizarre interest in me in particular. As far as I knew, not a single person in real life knew about my page. It's not like I shared it around or anything. No prizes for guessing who was behind it. What I found was disturbing. It was almost like a shrine. She was using a fake name, but I recognized Lily all over that thing. It was this cutesy pink and red page. There were a few posts about her interest, but most of the content was focused on her primary interest, me. Most of the posts were all about me. There were accounts of things I'd done recently, places I'd been, groups I participated in, going to the nightclub recently, as well as references to things as far back as I'd known her. It was clear she'd been keeping tabs on me, both online and offline, gathering every scrap of information she could about my life and hoarding it in this little collection. She talked about us eating lunch together, how special our dates had been to her, as if it was anything more than acquaintances just getting food after class. She even talked about the time she had forcibly kissed me in the woods. She quoted lyrics from all of my favorite songs, even though I'd never talked about them, and talked about how she'd always be there for me, no matter who else came into my life. Lots of references to loving me just the way he is as well, which answered another mystery about some anonymous love letters I'd been receiving earlier that year with the same wording. It got worse. There were a lot of posts about my boyfriend as well. Those were not so nice. It was angry and hateful. I didn't like to think of the sort of person who could write so obsessively being fixated on me. One thing that didn't make sense at first was that the blog had also made plenty of references to this best friend, Steven. She had never mentioned this person to me, and I'd never seen anyone else around her either. Her post talked a lot about Steven and how great a friend he was, how much fun they had together, how much he looked out for her. I was trying to work out whether this was an online friend or something, when one specific post made it all click. She had posted a photo and captioned it, "Steven sent this to me. He knew I would like it." The problem was, it was a photo taken straight from my page. I had not sent that to her. She took it from my page and then claimed I was her fictional best friend, because in her head she'd split me into two people, the two most important people in her life. In her messed up fantasies, I was both her perfect best friend and her soulmate who was going to end up with her. Who was she complaining to? Oh, she had an audience all right. People who took what she said at face value. I saw a bunch of random people agreeing with this stalker, things like my boyfriend didn't deserve me, we were bound to break up soon, I would be with Lily, the person I was clearly destined to be with. She had this fake fanfiction version of my life up for anyone to share their opinion on, and she made herself out to be the hero of it all, of course. I had only gone maybe a month back into this page's history, and I didn't look at everything that was there. It was too much, and I didn't want to see if there was anything from before I'd known her. Needless to say, I sent Lily a message confronting her about this blog. She said nothing. I can't stress how weird it was to have found pages and pages dedicated to me. Then she just acted like it never happened. She said nothing. Didn't even address it, just changed the subject like I'd never even said it, like she hadn't even registered that it existed. I've never seen deflection quite like it. Well, of course, afterward she deleted the page, or at least changed the name and hid it because I could never find it again. That was not the end though. I was not going to hang out with her anymore, but we were still shoved together in classes. She had started to actually scare me with what she might do next. I'm kind of a paranoid person already, so knowing someone was obsessively keeping track of me for who knows how long really scared me a lot. The next thing she pulled was trying to seduce my boyfriend. That was a useless attempt. What was her plan there? Did she hope to tell me he cheated and wait for me to break up with him or something? Why would I want her after that? When that didn't work, she tried to seduce all of my friends. None of them took the bait, thankfully. She ended up dating one of my former housemates for a while, but made sure to send me messages every day while they were together, letting me know she'd rather be with me instead. Lily made sure to stay in my life the entire time I was at university. There was a time when I tried to pull away from her, and she ended up starting these malicious rumors about me and damaging a career opportunity I'd put a lot of time into. I don't know all of what she did behind my back, but it made me realize it might be safer to just let her think she was a part of my life while ignoring her, rather than do something that would cause her to get angry. I knew at this point she really didn't have any reservations about hurting me to get what she wanted. After I graduated, Lily of course still wanted to hang around me, but now I didn't have that additional impetus of school keeping me there. I made excuses about work and barely talked to her after that point. I had entirely stopped posting on social media I knew she knew about. Of course, she would not give up that easily. Usually, I ignored all of her attempts though. I didn't think she was still tracking me online, but in hindsight, she probably was. I don't know how, but she'd reference things I mentioned online somewhere else she couldn't have known about. The last time we had a conversation for real, she sent me a message out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken at all in months, and we hadn't talked about anything serious in much longer than that. Thinking about that conversation still makes my skin crawl. At first, she asked me some questions about how long I'd known I was queer. I told her some basic stuff, the kind of things I'd tell anyone who asked. Then she changed the subject. She started talking about how I would feel about her if she was a boy, about wanting to be a boy for me. The messages quickly became fetishistic. Again, we were not even friends at this point. We'd never been especially close, and we'd barely spoken for years. I can't imagine sending messages like that even to a close friend, let alone someone who barely knew you. I tried telling her not to pull this crap with me, and then she decided to change tactics. She started role-playing as me. The worst part is that she seemed to believe it was real, that those things had actually happened to her, even when she was quoting me word for word. Things I'd told her only hours before were now part of her life. It was like she was trying to absorb me or something, to take over my history, to make my life a part of her. Yeah, I really didn't want to talk to her again after that. I ignored future attempts she made and eventually silently deleted her from the inactive social media, which was her only real way of contacting me. I really thought she might finally move on. But then I started getting more friend requests on everywhere. They're still sitting there unanswered because I know if I delete them, she'll somehow find a way to seek me out elsewhere. Lily and I met nearly 12 years ago. This story is just the highlights, and even then, it's only the stuff I knew about for sure. A lot happened behind my back. I just know it did. The scariest thing that ever happened to me happened while I was at summer camp. I used to go there every summer. I'm a boy and I really enjoyed it. I looked forward to it as well, and when my parents dropped me off, I was so excited I barely even said goodbye to them. I ran off immediately to try and get myself involved in the various activities. When I was 15 years old, I even got the opportunity to be a counselor myself. It was great, actually. I had been going there yearly and knew the place inside and out. I was generally seen as pretty responsible. Being a counselor meant I was allowed to take out canoes whenever I wanted to. I especially loved canoeing, so this was a really big plus for me. Being a counselor, though, was much harder work than I'd initially thought it would be. A lot of the younger boys were brats, of course, and it was difficult trying to control so many kids at once. I had to break up several fights and make sure kids were going to bed when they were supposed to, and help care for them when they got hurt. I also had to make all their schedules as well. It was real tough work. I guess I never realized that I was just like them when I was their age. I finally got a break one day when I asked to be let off the nature hike roster. I had been working so hard that the supervisors decided I needed some rest. I decided I was going to spend the day doing the only thing I could do that would get me completely away from any kids. I decided to go out on the canoe. The camp that I worked in was by this nice, beautiful, long river. No sooner had I set out, making sure I was going the opposite way of the nature hikes, than I felt a supreme sense of relief. The trees were so beautiful on each side of the river, and I got such a good view of the many hills around the camp. The water was calm and still that day too, so it was a very easygoing experience. I was now alone in this empty area. It was pretty quiet for the most part, other than the frequent buzzing of what I assume were cicadas or the occasional cry of a loon. Loon cries can be a bit unnerving if you've never heard one, but at least I could figure out what they were. With the echoing sound of the river valley, though, it made their cries seem so much more eerie. And when I had been rowing for a long time, I began to hear a different noise. It sounded as if someone were possibly chopping a tree or something. I was surprised when I heard this, but I wasn't really worried. If I had accidentally wandered onto anyone's property, I would just explain myself and leave right away. My canoe began getting closer and closer to the noise as I kept on rowing. Eventually, I was able to hear the original sound. There was definitely someone chopping something. I became intrigued. Maybe someone was building something out here. It wasn't too long before I eventually was able to make out some movement up ahead of me. There was someone in the woods on the left side of the forest, but I couldn't quite tell what they were doing. At first, I tried to make it out by just squinting, but then I recalled that I'd brought some binoculars with me. I took them out. This was a bit of a pain. Obviously, it's difficult to look through a pair of binoculars while also trying to control a canoe. In fact, it gave me a bit of motion sickness. Eventually, though, I did get a view of the man who was up on the hill. He appeared to be chopping a log on the ground. I realized it was nothing too important, but figured the man probably owned the area and decided to go ahead and turn back around. However, just before I had decided to put my binoculars down, I saw him swing the axe into this log. Then he moved away. I had to do a double take to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. There was a man lying on the log, with the axe firmly embedded in his chest. I dropped the binoculars into the canoe, afraid for my own safety. The man was pretty far away, but if I could see him through the trees with my binoculars, it was possible he could see me way out in the open on the river. I was thankful the river was calm at least, as I frantically paddled my way back towards the camp. The return trip was a nightmare. The peaceful sounds I'd heard on my way down the river no longer seemed so peaceful. Every loon cry made my heart jump. Every sound of an animal moving through the trees made my heart race. I kept on thinking it could be that man, that he knew I'd seen what he was doing. If he was willing to do that to whoever that person was, what was he willing to do to me? It took me a few hours to get back, but boy was I so relieved when I did. I told my supervisors what I'd seen, but they immediately dismissed me. They told me I'd probably misconstrued what was going on. I was looking through binoculars on a canoe through trees, to be fair. Besides, it would be nearly impossible to find someone in those hills if something really had happened. A bit cavalier if you ask me, but I really had no choice but to accept what they told me. I did continue going back to summer camp until I went off to college, but I never again went off on my own for any reason.